This is the Wing Woman Show. Are you ready? You're listening to The Wing Woman Show, and this is your host, Morgan Bars. Today's guest is Debbie Lundberg. She is the principal of Presenting Powerfully, where she is a well-known speaker and author when it comes to presenting yourself in a professional manner. And I'm so excited to have her on the podcast because we originally connected, I would say about 3 years ago at a program called Camp CEO here in the Tampa area, which was an incredible program through Girl Scouts of West Central Florida, where they would bring in about 30 leading female executives from the area and match them up with high school Girl Scouts for a weekend of programming, keynotes, and different physical challenges, which were very exciting. Obviously, the physical challenge side impacted me the most because I typically stay indoors for those kinds of conferences. But even for me, Camp CEO was very impactful because I did zip lining and rope climbing. It was an incredible experience. And that is where I met Debbie. So I'm so excited that you guys are able to really be a fly on the wall for our very first official conversation. Now, she is the author of her most recent book is Remote Work Rockstar, and she also has written Presenting Powerfully. Now, I'm holding the two books up right now because she so graciously sent them to me for me to read over, which we'll dive more into this episode. But I'm a huge fan of those small gestures that make a huge difference in the way that you are perceived as a professional at the end of the day. And even before we started recording this call, I took a sip out of one of my water bottles, and she gave me a great tip that is included in the Remote Work Rockstar book. And she said, try drinking out of a clear glass for your video calls, because video calls can already be so distracting that when you add in all these extra moving elements on the screen, and when they're colored, they can't see clearly through your glass, it makes such a difference. And I love being intentional about those small elements and the way that you represent yourself. So she also recommended Presenting Powerfully. So if you are interested in becoming a speaker, which she also talks about on this podcast, she recommended reading into that book where she breaks down a great keynote speech in a more in-depth way. So I will be diving in to those books, but in the meantime, let's tune directly into today's episode. Can you walk us back to the very beginning of your career? Did you always know that you wanted to be an author?
Thanks, Morgan. Thanks for having me. I did not always know that I wanted to be an author. I did know I had an entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, if I took you back to the very beginning, it would be a long, long story. A slight look back is, imagine back to when you were in elementary school and you did after school activities. One of them that I did was I set up an entire carnival in my parents' backyard and charged money for people to come in.
No way. That's the best story.
Well, and I did all the tricks. So I ran all the games and did all the tricks. And I loved it. I mean, third grade, I had a marker checkout where you could check out a marker for a day or for a week.
Oh my gosh.
So it was more the entrepreneurial spirit. And when I was a regional manager for General Motors up in Chicago, there were 5 regions, and I had the Midwest for the operations. And that was on fixed operations. So it was the operations side of operations, which seems redundant over and over again, doesn't it? But I loved working in corporate, and I had a wonderful admin named Phyllis. And one day I was talking with Scott, a guy who supported us with advertising, and I signed off on an invoice that I can appreciate your listeners and you and I might not think $30,000 is a ton of money, but I respect that amount of money.
Right.
And I signed it, and Scott said to me, we were on the phone, he said, okay, have a good weekend. And I hung up the phone and I said, you know what? Have a nice day is not thank you. And I said, I'm going to write a book about that one day. And Phyllis popped up and she said, are you really? And I said that in the early 2000s, and I worked for General Motors and went on to 2 national roles after that before I did my early retirement that I opted to do. but she really, when I said that, she said, "Are you really going to do it?" And so in 2007, I did. It was in the back of my
Right.
mind. So I give Phyllis a bit of the credit for jumping up and being very excited. You know, she's like, "I've never worked for a woman before. I've never this." And she's like, "Now you're going to write a book. This is great." And I thought, ooh, so I love sharing ideas that assist people that it breaks my heart sometimes when people say to me, "Oh, when I'm around you, I don't want to do something wrong." And I want people to know I'm not looking for something wrong. I'm looking to give tips that assist people in
Right.
doing things correctly, because my learning is 90, if not 95% from my doing them wrong and nobody told me. And so I had these
Right.
embarrassing situations over and over. And most of the time I can laugh about it, but sometimes, it hurt because it left me just hanging, and I don't want other people
Right.
to feel that way. So the answer to your question, did I always know I wanted to be an author? No, but in the early 2000s, it really struck me that it was quite possible. And then in 2007, my first book came out.
I love that because it speaks to the amount of detail that you put in your communication, in your brand. And I can just tell from the second we hopped on this Zoom call to record the podcast that you really pay attention to details, which is very respectable. So I love that about you.
Thanks.
So you were at General Motors, and then did you transition? You opted for early retirement, you said, and then after that is when you published your book?
Well, it's a funny story because I had been very fortunate within General Motors. I, again, had no complaints. So sometimes people will say, "Oh, you got out of the rat race." I did not dislike it. So I'm one of those entrepreneurial, spirited people who was
Right.
also enjoyed working in the corporate world. But what happened was I met my husband, and thinking we would go along with my career, he said, "I don't want to live in Michigan." And I had set it up that I had a group in Michigan and a group in Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was working out really nicely, where I was flying back and forth to Michigan, and General Motors, rightly so, decided, based on some economic impacts, that they could move everything to Michigan for economies of scale.
Right.
And I thought, well, here we go. We'll go to Michigan. And we were engaged. And he said, "I don't want to live in Michigan." And I thought, well, I don't want to live my first year of marriage not
Right.
together. And I had this crazy idea, Morgan, and I hope people will hear this as a don't be silly moment. I really thought if I wasn't 40 years old and had all this experience, that people might not listen to me for coaching and
Mm-hmm.
speaking. And there I was, 33, and my husband said, "Deb, just do it now. People will listen to you." And I'd been training Dale Carnegie training adjunctly
Mm-hmm.
for 11 years. And so I had that competence and success too. It was that, whether it was because I'm small in nature or a
Right.
female, or because I had been somewhat protected by being in a large organization,
Mm-hmm.
that I just wasn't certain people would buy me, so to speak.
Right.
And and so, but one of my friends who introduced Michael and me, she is an HR just guru and expert and an amazing confidant. And she said, I said, what am I going to do? And we were talking one day, and she just said, I don't know if I said it first or she said it first. I really don't, but I give her credit that it was like, "Well, what about retiring? Could somebody at 33 retire?" And she said she would assist me with how to word it. And I went in and said, "I don't want to quit. I have this great retirement and I don't want to leave you hanging. I'm going to give you 7 months." And the person who I reported to at the time, even though I was at a high level, I mean, there are so many
Mm-hmm.
executive levels, that he was smart, he was kind, but he was somewhat political, but not in a negative way. He said, "I can't sign off on this and it come back at me. You've got to get other people to support it if you want me to." So I did. I contacted 8 people, 5 of whom said they would support it.
Wow.
And in that 7 months, I did all sorts of unusual things. I said, "Look, like, the title doesn't matter to me as much as I want to contribute, and I will assist." And
Right.
so for that 7 months, I I worked as the facilities manager. I did an emergency response plan, which I'd never done, but okay, now I know how to do one. So
Yeah.
the scrappiness of it, I find a fun challenge. And I kept training Dale Carnegie training, and then kept doing that for a year after my retirement from General Motors, and became the instructor of the year. So it brought together nicely this
Mm-hmm.
business acumen and the speaking. And so that that really was a big turning point in the
Right.
story. And as I mentioned, like for you, I'm so excited for you
Yeah.
and all of your success, that you don't want to ever let your background, your starting point, your age, your experience stop you from something that if you do it well, that you can be good at. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we're not all going to be good at everything. I mean, I'm no volleyball star at 5'2", but if we have the capacity, then go for it.
Yeah, no, I just love how it seems like you transitioned so smoothly. And with that last 7 months, you were able to like experience a bunch of different things before you transitioned into that next stage.
Mhm.
So that was very exciting. Do you remember what your first speaking gig was?
Well, I remember my very first Dale Carnegie class,
Uh-huh.
which is different, of course. Now, I remember my very first paid speaking engagement that wasn't a Dale Carnegie session. And now, of course, I don't use any of the Dale Carnegie, although they're wonderful, and I still think the world of the training, that's all theirs. But my very first speaking engagement, you will get a kick out of this, is it was in Colorado. So I flew to Denver. I was, thrilled, excited,
Right.
nervous. And they said, we're going to have you do a talk about how, because I'm high energy, low stress. You probably know that. Like
Yeah.
I don't carry a lot of stress, but I have a lot of energy and optimism. And so we went to a dude ranch, and I filled out a form beforehand, and I wrote about my level of experience with a horse. And I said it was limited as a child, but I was involved in sports all along, but I was very clear. I felt like I was basic, introductory, and they said they would assign us as appropriate. So we get there, and they said, we don't have anybody else who is at your level. Everyone else is either mid or advanced. So we're going to give you this horse called Vanna White. She was white horse, because she's a little older. And so I kid you not, I'm there to speak on stress and having a good disposition and how to process through things. And this horse bit me. And she bit me. It was my fault because I was tense. And so we get to the top of this mountain that you can see 3 states. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. They've hauled wine up there. And I'm in my mind, just as everything's happening,
Oh
thinking,
my gosh.
it'll work out. It'll work out. It'll work out. And so that was my very first, but that was before I had my practice even. It was truly a, a dabble in it when I was in Chicago working, and I did that on the weekend. And this, I'll probably never, I hope I never forget it. I still have, they gave me this horseshoe, and it's hanging in our guest bedroom, because that was the confidence
Oh
to
yeah.
move forward when underneath I was like, oh my gosh. And then, the horse hit like some loose ground, and we slid down, and then she galloped some. I mean, I was just like, all right, smiling along with it. And then I told them when I got to the top, because none of the women who were attending knew that I didn't have that experience. And the not ranger, forgive me, I'm mixing up my word here on something else, but the person who was with the ranch, the wrangler, excuse me,
Oh, the
the
Wrangler.
wrangler said, if I hadn't seen Vanna bite you myself, I would have never believed it, because it just seemed so out of character. But so that was my first paid speaking engagement. It's amazing that I ever thought I would have a business doing that. But then a very close second to it was at one of my corporate events, was at Club Med, and they said, just wear shorts and flip-flops. And I thought, I'm not wearing shorts and
Right.
flip-flops. You're a presenter when everybody else is a little bit older and a little bit different. So I did wear wedges and Bermuda shorts with a nice shirt. But I
Mm-hmm.
remember thinking, how is it that you're telling me what to wear?
Right.
But as a result, in my contracts, it says I fly Southwest and I wear a dress. And unless they change that, that's how they
I
can
love
expect me to come. because, know thyself, right?
Yes. Wow. See that? Those are the details right there.
Yes,
What a
absolutely.
great first story. And you'll definitely always remember that.
Hmm. And hopefully
Always.
always have that horseshoe to remind me
Oh,
too.
you have to keep it. You have to. So, for those of our listeners who have ambitions in the future to become a speaker, what are some things that they can do today to get them a couple more steps ahead of that big goal? Hey, want to have real conversations just like we are right now on this podcast? Well, you're in luck because the newest membership feature has officially launched just in time for the brand new year. And a little drum roll, please. Our newest feature is matchmaking. So, on top of being a member and all the perks you get already, which include bi weekly group coaching, monthly masterclasses, a private community, we as wing women are physically going into the community and matching you up with other members on virtual networking coffee dates based on your goals, your business, and the new goals that you want to achieve in 2021. So rolling into the new year, if you're wanting to up level your brand, up level your business, and connect with a community of like-minded, brand building, dream chasing women, then this is the community for you. And since I'm interrupting this podcast episode for you right now, I have a little surprise for you. If you head over to wingwomanbrands.com, click on the matchmaking membership and enter the code podcast, all capital letters, you'll get to try it out for free. So let me know what you think, and I'll let you get back to this episode.
Yes, one of the biggest challenges for most aspiring, I'll say, speakers is they speak too much about themselves and their credibility and their credentials, and they don't story tell. I mean, you may have noticed, and I'm not perfect by any stretch. I get coaching, even though I've written a book on presenting, and I've gotten to coach some of the most interesting and I don't like to say some quote unquote famous people, but some people who have some really good stature and some great backing, who were thoughtful enough to include me in their process, and that's been wonderful. So a lot of aspiring speakers tend to say, I'm something like, if it were the example, I'm Debbie Lundberg and I have all these books and I've done this and I've done that, and nobody cares about your credentials until they feel you cared about the connection with them. And if I could stress that in a very positive way, is captivate us, don't categorize us by giving us all of these credentials and making us feel like we're supposed to respect you or be in awe. I mean, imagine if I led with, oh, I have a couple hundred Scottos and I ran with the Olympic torch and I donated a kidney. I mean, it just sounds obnoxious.
Right.
But if you can weave those into your stories that are appropriate, then people can relate to it. So it might not be the counsel that a lot of people would think of, but it's really saying, you know what, unless they realize that I genuinely am connected or can be interesting, like I coined that phrase, edutainment. I want to educate and entertain. I don't want to be silly, but I do want to be respectful.
Right.
So for everybody, think about, how many times have you started by saying, I'm going to start with a story? Well, who cares, right? I'm going to start with a story is a wasted part. Say, remember when, or picture this, or imagine. And a lot of, what I'll tell you is, a lot of people are presenters and not speakers. They present information, but they're not speakers. And a lot of speakers aren't storytellers. And some storytellers aren't evoking inspiration. And so people say they're a motivational speaker. And I only just recently started accepting that title because of people sharing that they were motivated. But I felt like I can be a speaker, I can inspire. It's that, though, I can tell the stories that connect. So for no matter what your age or experience, number one, have a story worth telling and make sure it's your own. Don't ever misrepresent what you've got. You know, like I said earlier, I worked on the operations side. You give those clarifications not to minimize your credibility, more to make sure that there's that context to it. So for speakers, do that, have a story, and then by all means, put your audience first.
Right. Well,
First,
those are great
first,
tips,
first.
especially
Thanks.
to just lay that solid brand foundation on social media, on your landing page, to communicate to people even when you're asleep 24/7 online. What about when it comes to actually finding or booking speaking engagements? How did you get your first ones?
The first speaking engagements, believe it or not, are the same way I get them now, 14 years
Really?
later, is word of mouth experience. I was really fortunate recently that my husband and I volunteered some time for a run for, unfortunately, a young girl who had a terminal disease, and a lot of my husband's friends all rallied around, and we did a big run years and years ago. And at the after party, we were talking. There weren't a lot of us. We all had these T-shirts on, and we were just socializing and connecting as human beings. And one person was talking with me about something, and I gave him some ideas, and then he shared with somebody else, a woman who he works for, and she's been a client on and off for about 12 years. Well, she just came back asking about a virtual experience for her
Oh,
team,
wow.
which led to another person in there in the healthcare industry, another virtual, which led to another virtual teaming. And so
Holy cow.
it's, I mean, it's all, I say, I use a lot of acrostics and mnemonics to remember things. And IIAA, it is always an interview. So it's IIAAI. And when you think about that, it's probably faster to say it is always an interview, because it's not that you have to put it on. Don't get me wrong. Like, I don't want people to feel like they have to be so buttoned up. It's just, if you live what you do and it's your passion and your purpose, then when I meet people on the golf course, or I meet people at a run or something like that, and they ask what I do, a lot of times they follow through and they hire me, and I'm grateful. At the same time, I'm willing to work it. I do a lot. My packages have a lot in them for people.
Right.
But that very first one wasn't the one I mentioned. My very first, though, was from someone who came through Dale Carnegie training. I knew, and I had a non-compete, so I would not honor my signature and my respect for Dale Carnegie training. And the person asked me about doing something, and I said, if you want to check with them and they want to hire me through Dale Carnegie, yes, but if not, I want to respect them. And that organization waited the full 2 years. I mean, I'm sure they had a lot of other things in between, but they waited and hired me after the non-compete
Wow.
was done. And I'll never forget that. I'm still friendly and still do work with the man who was my original contact.
Right.
And now I know their whole business, and they may still do other work. But my thought was, some people said to me, oh, nobody will ever find out. And I thought, I will know. And in my heart of hearts, I just wasn't going to do it, nor did that
Exactly.
company pressure me, but they waited. They waited. So in my first 2 years of my practice, I focused on mortgage and real estate, because I didn't have non-competes there, because I did work for a consulting firm. I want to say counseling. I don't know where that was coming from. A consulting firm for a year in between. Now, I was upfront with them. I said, I'm going to have my own practice. I would like to work for a consulting firm to learn some things. I will do a great job. And I was straightforward with them, but I think they thought, nah, she'll love it here. But before the year was up, right at that time, I left. So I had 2 non-competes. I honored them both. So I stayed in an area that I didn't have conflict. And so even though I've had 14 years, it's really been 12 years in the full mass, so to speak. And
Right.
everything's been referral.
Wow. So do you find that niching down really helped you in the beginning because you were niched to that one specific industry?
It did. I'll tell you what, I have a lot of appreciation for the fact that in a couple of organizations, I got to write everything for their entire company. I mean,
Wow.
the onboarding, the leadership training, the coaching. So I really was able to develop like the OJT, the on the job
Mm-hmm.
training,
Yeah.
and deliver it at the same time. Now, a mistake I made was I put a lot of, that expression, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
I put about 85% of my eggs in this one basket, and that organization got a little big for their britches and came
Mm.
to me and said, we can't afford to pay you out this 1-year contract that we have. And I said, hang on, how about I'll let you out if you pay me through next month. So it wasn't all without flaws by getting too niched, because that niche that we have, or niche, however,
Right.
what what that does is it creates this expertise. It also can create a distance effect. So I learned
Mm-hmm.
from that while I loved it and I was grateful, I also said, ooh, this might be a good idea not to get so specific. So that's when I changed from the industries to my focus of communication, behaviors, and relationships, which I wish everybody would stop calling them soft skills and would call them foundational skills, because
Mm-hmm.
it's the foundation for our success.
Right. And now that foundation is very different since it's virtually. So let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about your newest book, Remote Work Rockstar, because
Yes.
that came at perfect timing. Oh,
You want me to
perfect.
see
Yeah,
it?
you can hold it up because we'll have the video version available too. There it is. And they can get it on Amazon, right?
They can get it on Amazon. They can
Amazon.
go to my website, DebbieLundberg.com. I keep a few of them also. So if somebody wants one signed, I'm
Okay.
happy to send it. But Amazon has it. It's available everywhere.
Okay, great. Yeah. So you launched that in the midst of the pandemic, which was perfect timing. What was that process like, launching a book in the middle of the pandemic?
Well, the process was one of an unfortunate circumstance, because March 13th came and the next week came, and a lot of my business started to get postponed and then diminish down to to nearly nothing.
Right.
And I'd spoken on remote work in the past, but I would get asked to do it about every 16, 18 months. I mean, it was not a common request, although I'd been a remote work rock star for most of my career. So what happened was, Morgan, and I hope your listeners hear this, as I could have been really devastated. And I'm not saying I wasn't hurt. I was. My business, I found it interesting. People would be upset that someone lost their job. And I was thinking, in effect, I've lost my job because there was no business. And so instead of being down or upset about it, I reached out to all my clients and all the organizations I've ever volunteered with and said, would you like a complimentary session on how to work remotely, how to utilize Zoom,
Mm.
how to schedule, what to call things? Like, this is a meeting. When you're on the phone, it's a
Right.
call. This is a Zoom meeting. You're in a Zoom room, or you're in a meeting, so that people know that they're going to have sound and video.
Right.
And I started reaching out and putting together a program. And by the second week, so before the end of March, I delivered 3 of them. And
Wow.
that included explaining to people how to download Zoom beforehand. So then I did a video. So I've done daily workday tips for years, for almost 10 years now. I used to do a video every once in a while, started doing a video every day. And then I started doing these sessions that were free. And I've now done over 50 of them,
Holy
complimentary,
cow.
and I'm now getting business. and and that certainly was my hope, part of it, but my real desire was to stay connected, to stay relevant, and most importantly, to serve. I thought, if I can serve with purpose, then the days, nobody imagined it would be this long, but I just kept thinking, these couple of weeks, these few weeks that it would
Right.
be, I can provide some value, and that people may have more success because they got these tips. And so I had no intention on March 13th of writing a book called Remote Work Rockstar. I had a lot of things scheduled, and I had something like 37 flights I had to cancel.
Oh
just so you
my
know.
gosh.
So when I redirected my energy toward giving these services, I was working with one of my clients and my podcast co-host Barb Zant. She was asking me a lot of questions, and I was like, man, there's a lot. I mean, I could write a book. She said, you should write a book. And I said, I think I'll write a book. And I started realizing that all of these presentations, I really had everything for 7 chapters that were really good. And Barb was kind enough. So she's noted as a contributor because I would ask her, what do you think about this? Tell me what your team's doing. I mean, when she would tell me, and she's given me permission to say this, just so you know, because it's in the book, when she would say, Debbie, someone is in bed on a Zoom. Yeah, like, what do I say? Yeah, it's like, okay, we have some etiquette opportunities, and writing an etiquette column for Tampa Bay
Right.
Business and Wealth magazine, I could bring some of that in. So it's the windy road is the most scenic often, and it was a winding road to get to Remote Work Rockstar, and I wouldn't change a step, even though I would have loved to have had income during 6 months.
Right.
But now when I get the text or I get the call or I get the email that says we connected totally differently. I mean, I do these virtual teaming events where people get boxes and we open them together and they make choices. I have one coming up in 2 weeks, and there's just ways to do it because of having done it live.
That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So they
Yeah,
get
it is.
boxes at their house and you guys open them together?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So
Wow.
I select it based on what their interests are. I mean, I go in and I know that people get other boxes from Amazon. So when I send them to them, it has their first name, their last name, but their company names in the middle. And I say, tell everybody in your home who's a box opener to leave this one until that
Right.
day. I mean, there's so much. Like, people say, oh, I'll just, have our intern do a teaming, and I don't begrudge them wanting to do it, but it's like, it's not going to have that connection. And I'm not the only one who can do it. I'm not saying that, but it's all these touches of how do you make that happen. So
Right.
the book became a really nice focus to have everything in one place. And then from the book, and I mean, I mail out a lot of books. I was golfing with someone from Delta Airlines, and he said his wife might be interested. And I sent that book
Oh
this
yeah.
morning because it's like that. I love the chase of thinking of earning business, and then I love thinking about what'll change for people when they get the tips. So the
Right.
book is
Well,
nice.
gosh, you have just an eye for detail, and it shines through even with the boxes, with all the little details that you've even helped me with since we've been on this Zoom call. So I can't wait to get my copy just to read through, because I am such a huge fan, I guess, because I did start with Patricia Rossi, who was an etiquette expert. I have that eye for detail too, but in a different realm of things. So
Mm-hmm.
I can appreciate that 100%. So give us a few of your favorite remote work etiquette tips.
Absolutely. Number one, come on and check. Don't jump on a 12 o'clock meeting at 12 o'clock. And if it's a different platform, then download it and check it. And then check your sound and your visual. You notice I'm not like this, like,
Right.
oh, hi. I'm here. Think of it, it is a moving headshot. So it should be framed, and you should have space around you, or a virtual. But if you have a virtual background and you move like I do, it'll come in and out. So be careful.
Right.
So that's number one, is know your platform and go in there. Listen, remote work rock stars are made, not born. I'm not perfect, so please don't think that. But here are some ways to avoid some missteps, right?
Yeah.
Second is, when you check everything, you don't want to ever say, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? You want to say, if you noticed you were muted, you come off mute. You know you're not on mute. I mean, the thing's not blocked out, or your microphone's not flashing. So you can say, thanks for waiting for me, and move forward. But if you ask, can you hear me? Then somebody has to answer. I mean, so you're off topic.
Right.
So you can avoid that. And another one is, have a clear glass. Have water and have a clear glass, because if I drink out of this right now, it doesn't detract from, if we're in a meeting, it just doesn't take
Right.
away from it. But if I have a big clunky
It's basically this
something,
one.
Well, and that one's not bad. But I mean, some people have in there like solid and you can't see through them. The idea is we're under a different visual. If we were in a meeting, we wouldn't see everything, but because we're here. And another one is when you leave a room, mute your microphone and your video because you don't want to see somebody get up, turn, you see their rear end, the chair, it's an empty chair. So, I mean, there are so many, clearly. Those are some that I think people don't necessarily think about. The not saying, can you hear me? The clear glass, the muting of the video if you're going to get up. And you don't have to announce anything to anyone. And the last one, since you asked for a few, is you know what? Do not go into a Zoom meeting, a Zoom room, and not use your video. Because if you're going to not have video, then have a phone call. And so people saying, oh, well, I don't have my camera on because I'm having a bad hair day. They think it's funny. It doesn't do anything for their credibility. It doesn't make us connect with you. And what we're attempting to do in a virtual world is, as much as possible, supplement, because it won't ever replace, but supplement what we're missing. And when people have a hat on or they're in bed or they don't put their video on, it's in their mind acceptable. In the rest of our minds, we might chuckle for a second, but I haven't ever seen a list of leadership characteristics that said wasn't prepared, looked like they'd just gotten out of bed. So no matter what your title is or how long you've been working, have that not only pride in yourself, it's the respect for the other person. I mean, imagine if I came on your podcast, I'm like, oh, I had a really rough weekend and the time changes, so too bad, please don't put the video on. It's like all of a sudden we're making it about ourselves and not about the audience, because to me, you are the audience and your listeners, you were kind enough to ask. I'm excited. Like, thank you. So it's probably way too many tips that you
that is incredible. That is just a great teaser and trailer for all of our listeners who need to hop on Amazon or your website and buy your book. So I'm going to link it down in the description so that if you're listening to this podcast or watching us on YouTube, you can just click directly to, I'll give you Debbie's website as well as a link to her Amazon storefront so that you guys can support her and just become remote work rock stars like we all want to be in 2020. Debbie, thank you so much for joining us today. I have loved just hearing all of these tips and golden nuggets of wisdom throughout your experience and journey.
You're welcome, Morgan. You are a rock star, and I've learned a couple of things from you. So please don't think it's one way. I'm open to feedback, and I appreciate being included. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.